Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am so excited about this week's guest. I have been now for weeks because I first heard Frank's story on a podcast that I love called This Is Actually Happening. And I had my podcast producer reach out to him, and he accepted and agreed to come on to this podcast to share his. The only thing I can say, trying to describe his story, is how much it hit me and stayed with me and has continued to stay with me. And so I'm not going to give anything away. I'm going to let Frank share his both sad and deeply inspiring grief and loss journey. And I asked him how he'd like to be introduced, and he said, just introduce me as Frank. So, Frank, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here with us all today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on too.
So let's just go ahead and jump in. I know your story, and I actually can't wait to listen to your story again. Start wherever you would like, and I will ask questions as they come up
Right.
when I listen to you.
So on July 2012, I had a wonderful life. I had the life we all kind of strive for, at least people my age. I was married for 30 years. I married a woman named Ann. I met Ann at a Whataburger where I worked at in high school. And Whataburger, if you don't know, is a little local Texas restaurant that has hamburgers. And I met her, and she was one of those people that I really instantly liked. And then she said, "What are you going to do? Go to school, go to college?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do." And she said, "Look, you're smart enough. Go take the SAT, go to college." I said, "Okay." She goes, "If you don't, you can't date me anymore." So, so I started going to college, and then we went to a Halloween party that first year in school. And I was dressed up like something, but she had made a clown outfit out of basically nothing. She sewed together this clown outfit. And we were walking to the parking lot of the Halloween party. And she said, "What do you think about Buddhism? What do you think about Judaism? What do you think about Christianity? How do they intersect?" And I said, "I really don't know anything about that stuff." She goes, "Well, if you're going to keep dating me, you're going to have to catch up. You're going to have to study some of these things. You're going to have to read Herman Hesse." She gave me a whole list of books to read before we could date further. So she challenged me quite a bit. And then we go to this Halloween party, and we're there, and she's talking to me about all this philosophy and how you should live your life and a life examined. And then the band comes on, and it's a punk polka band, and they start playing punk polka, and she's just dancing her head off, just dancing, dancing, dancing. And I thought, well, this is somebody I could fall in love with. And I did. And we got married right out of college. I mean, like at 22 years old. We had two kids, one in high school, one was in college, and a daughter and a son. And they were great kids. We had a lot of fun having them. We had a dog, Spud the Corgi. Corgis, if you don't know, are big dogs with short legs. I was 14 years in a church as a board member because Ann wants to join a church for our family. I was on the board. I was a Sunday school teacher. I led 4 mission trips to build houses for Habitat for Humanity, actively engaged in teaching teenagers. I had a job as an HR business partner at a large county hospital. I was doing a half marathon every month, doing a 5K every other day. I was doing lots of volunteer work in the community. And we had bought in this old Victorian house in an old part of town, giant wraparound porch covered with huge pecan trees. We put a picket fence around it so we can keep the kids in the yard, and watch them play. And we redid that house slowly over time, but it was our house. We made that our house. And the kids would bring their friends over for the weird old house. And we had just a great life.
What I love about your story is that, especially when you talk about the picket fence, is that you were really living. Everyone says, "Oh, you're living your best life," but you really were living your best life, weren't you? I mean, you and
Right.
your wife had this really beautiful partnership. You had your children. You were very much involved with volunteer work and the church.
Everything you would hope for, really. I mean, it was great. I couldn't like it more. And then August 2012, Ann was a electrical engineer. And then after a few years of that, she decided to go be a speech therapist. So she went back to school and became a speech therapist at an elementary school. because she felt being an electrical engineer, she was doing defense work. She didn't feel comfortable doing that. So during the summer, she always got her checkups, did her medical exams because she didn't want to miss any school. In August 2012, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And the initial scan was what's some breast cancer. So we go to a large community hospital in the area that's a teaching hospital. The doctor sits down, a female doctor, and she goes, okay, this is a breast cancer, fairly not very far advanced. This is pretty, okay, let's look at your scans. Let's look at your records. She starts looking at the scans and the records, and she just turns to both of us and her face kind of falls. And she goes, well, no, this is much worse than we thought. This is a highly aggressive form of breast cancer. It's in your liver and your lungs. It's potentially spread to your other breast. We're going to have to do some serious chemotherapy. So they put her on serious chemotherapy that knocks her in the hospital for a little while. But she has a really good treatment plan and a good doctor, and it starts working. The treatment starts working, and she has what they call a complete pathological response, no evidence of disease found.
Which means what, Frank? Does that mean that there was hope? Because when I hear that it's an aggressive part of cancer, I mean, at this point, did you think that Anne was terminal, or did you guys feel like there was real hope that she could live a much longer life?
Well, when they tell you you're stage 4, you're terminal.
That's a good point, right?
We knew she was terminal, but we thought, I mean, and you have all these prayers and thoughts and hopes, and Anne was a serious fighter. And it's like, oh, she's going to beat this. And it's like, oh, crud. The chemo made her really sick, but it also got rid of her cancer. And we thought, oh man, she's going to be one of those people that's just going to go on for a long time, you know?
Okay.
So we were like, if you're with somebody with cancer or any kind of serious illness, there's a period of high, 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 then low, 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 and then high, 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 and low, low, low. And the amplitudes are huge. The highs are really high, the lows are very low. And then about a year later, we were out on a hike and she starts getting bad headaches. And so she goes back to the doctor. They order more scans. She's still doing regular monthly chemotherapy, but it doesn't make her that sick. The regular scans come back and she's got 12 plus tumors in her head, in her brain. And they're large enough that they're actually squeezing her brain. But that was her only symptom, was the headaches. The doctor was like amazed she could walk into the building. So they say, you know, you've got to do something immediate and drastic. So they do whole brain radiation. That's where they put your head in a vise. They gave her 20 gray units of radiation. That slowed the cancer down, knocked it down a little bit, completely got rid of the rest of her hair. One of the saddest things we had to do when she started chemo was I would sat in her backyard, put a towel around her, and I shaved her head, right? And then we came around on the second round with the whole brain, and they said the hair will not grow back because we're going to kill the hair cells. So I shaved her head for this final time in the backyard. That works for a while. And this whole time she's staying at work. She does not quit work. She stays at work.
And what's happening between the two of you at this point? Are you talking about the reality of what's happening? Are you moving along as though she's got years left? Like, what is going on for you personally and for the two of you as a couple?
Well, we instantly had big, big talks. When the brain tumor started, we went and got a will. And then we talked about what kind of funeral she wanted, what kind of service she wanted, and what life we should live afterwards. And her big thing was, I don't want this to mess up anybody else's life. Just go on with your life. Don't let it interfere. She was super stubborn. And like the neurosurgeon said, you know, spunky patients are good and bad because they tend to do a little more than they should. And she kept going. I mean, she just kept going and would not refuse and stayed at work and wore a wig the whole time and then wore a wig on the weekends. And I said, well, you don't have to wear a wig on the weekends. She said, no, if I see any of my kids from school, I don't want them to be shocked at my appearance. So she was always thinking of others. And her big concern was about us, not about herself. So it was good and bad. I mean, if you've ever lived with somebody with a terminal illness, it's like a slow motion horror show. Things get slowly worse and worse and worse till you just don't know how bad they are. So her tumors were kind of slowed down for a bit, then they came back. She started having other effects. They had to do gamma knife. It's where they bolt your head down with a colander on your head, and you have to sit under a gamma beam for a certain amount of hours. That had a good effect for a little while. And then it started getting worse again. And we had to do a craniotomy, a brain surgery in the back of her head to try to get things kind of calmed down. And then that craniotomy, well, one thing about Ann on her treatment, let me say this, is she had a mastectomy. And the doctor said, I would do a mastectomy, even though you had a good response, just to make sure nothing's there. And so Ann goes to the surgeon and says, well, I want to do it over spring break so I can go back to work on Monday. And the doctor says, well, no, this is 6 to 8 weeks of recovery. She goes, no, you don't understand. I'm going back to work on Monday. So the doctor says, okay, we'll do the surgery. You'll come to me on Monday and we'll see what we're going to do. So she did the surgery, came back on Monday and went back to work on Tuesday with the surgical train still attached with all the stuff.
I mean, that just sounds remarkable to me. She just sounds like she was this woman with this incredible will.
Yeah, but she was very private and very quiet about it all. So it was just, she kept it to herself and didn't want anybody to know about it. She didn't want anybody to know the struggle, really. But she kept getting worse and worse. There was a friend of hers who was an art teacher, and I had the art teacher, because she still insisted on driving, follow her to work and follow her back home to make sure she could make it okay. We had to make all these excuses. The art teacher would say, oh, my tire's making a noise. Can you follow me? This is happening. Can you follow me? So, but we kept her going all the way through. And about December, we started getting ready for Christmas break. She had the craniotomy right after Thanksgiving, was unable to go back to work, could not even walk hardly. And when they did the craniotomy, they figured out that the cancer had actually spread much more than they thought. It was really a bad cancer. And they said, make this the best Christmas you can, because this is the last Christmas. So we took her in the wheelchair to the mall. We went shopping. We got her all these presents, and we had a really pretty good Christmas, a very sad Christmas, because we knew it was all going to be the last. We knew it was bad. We had all of my relatives were pitching in to help take care of her during the day. And she kept talking about going back to school. And we also pulled my son out of college and said, you're going to have to just stay home because we don't know what's going to happen here. And she got very upset. Don't take him out of school. It's going to slow him down a semester, So, but we did anyway. And then in January 15th, she passed away. She was out of work for about 4 weeks to 6 weeks, somewhere in there. It was all she missed on work. So then, right after that, I'm taking the dog for a walk, and I realize he can't keep up. We usually do these big spirited fast walks. He can't keep up. And I'm trying to go faster. And then we take him to the vet and find out he has cancer too.
Oh, gosh, Frank.
And it's really bad cancer. It's really spread. And you didn't realize his condition was declining because we were so busy with Ann. So we had to put him down a few days later. And then I decided to go running in one of those mud runs. I hop off of a wall and turn my knee and hear my knee pop.
Oh.
I ended up having to have knee surgery, and they said, you just can't run anymore because people your age should not be doing mud runs, is what the ortho told me.
And the running was part of your coping, wasn't it?
That was my coping, and suddenly I couldn't run. I had my knee in a brace and all that stuff. Recovered pretty quickly, but it just really, I could not run. I took 4 weeks off from work for family medical leave. I had my family filling in. I had family medical leave to help take care of her. And then that was December, month of December. And then I took my vacation and any personal days I had off. So I was off for about 6 weeks. I came back to work right at the end of January. And my boss calls me in the office and he says, hey, you've been absent a lot. And so, yeah, family medical leave. And he goes, and you've been kind of distracted and people have had to cover for you. So we're going to let you go today. So I got terminated from my job, and then.
So your wife dies, your dog dies,
right?
You lose your ability to run, which is your one coping. You're recovering from a knee surgery, and now you are fired from a job,
right?
Because you've been distracted because your wife died. It's insanity.
It is, but it's the way corporate America is these days. It seems like, we don't care a lot about people. And then as I'm sitting at home in January, the bills start really rolling in. And my wife had insurance under the Texas Teachers Insurance Plan, but a lot of claims were denied and weren't covered. And even though we had insurance, we had almost $200,000 in medical debt pile up. And so I had all this medical debt. I didn't have a job, couldn't run, didn't have a dog. My daughter moved back out of the house, back to her place. My son was going to go back to school. And I was just like all alone. So my entire world just crashed. I mean, I lost everything I'd worked for, everything that was important to me. At the same time, the church really helped on the funeral for Anne, but I didn't hear from them ever since. I mean, they just went quiet, and I didn't go back to church. I had to drop out of church going so much because Anne was so sick. I had to take care of her, and I kind of got distanced from the church. I just didn't hear back from many people. They would do these monthly calls, and they would say, "So how are you doing?" And I'd say, "Well, wife's passed away, no dog. I'm out in debt. I don't have a job. I'm really maybe seriously depressed. I don't know what's going on." And they'd say, "Okay, we'll pray for you," and then hang up the phone. That's all I got from the church. So I just felt like I'd been dropped into an abyss. It really was a black pit. I mean, I just couldn't. I had grief brain, the worst grief brain ever. And it's always worse for you. But I put my keys in the freezer. I had car wrecks. I would run into cars just because I could hardly see to drive. I couldn't cry. I couldn't feel anything. I was just like in this weird, numb fog. I couldn't feel anything. I could hardly see anything. And I just didn't know what was going to happen.
Did your children have any idea of, you call it the abyss, and I think that that's what really struck me. I told you before we started recording, when I listened to you tell this story, that what struck me was I could feel that depth of darkness that you are describing. And I was curious of what was happening with your children. Did anybody know just how far you'd fallen?
They had an idea, but the other thing is they were so busy grieving themselves that all three of us were locked into our own grief.
Mm.
And I apologized to him and said, I could not take care of you because I couldn't even take care of myself. Right. And we've had talks years later. It's like, we just were each of us so grief struck in our own way that we couldn't even see the other person's pain. So my daughter, it took her years to get over losing her mom because they were very close. And she's just now really doing very well. But I couldn't even help her. I couldn't even see them. I was just so locked into mine. Yeah.
So you basically were just doing nothing but going through the motions. Now you've got these mounting bills. What happens next?
Everything overwhelmed me. And so I even tried one time, I got a thing of tequila and I thought I'll just drink and drink and drink and that'll help. So I drank some tequila, a fair amount of it, and I'm not a big drinker. And the next morning I was in a brain fog, in a grief fog, and I was hungover and I felt terrible and I got sick everywhere. So it's like, well, that's, I can't drink myself to death because it's so uncomfortable. Right. But I didn't know what to do. And I couldn't sleep. I would walk around in our little town. I would just walk around the middle of the night because I just couldn't sleep. And I would walk around, I'd try to sit, and I would sit on that porch. We had this big wraparound porch, and I used to sit there and watch the kids play, all the Easter egg things. And I would just sit on that porch. And I remember it was just the middle of the night. It's cold. It's February. And I'm just sitting out on the porch and it's dark outside. It's dark in my soul. I mean, I'm just as dark as you can get. And that song by Dawes came on. And one of the words is, you can stare into the abyss, but the abyss is staring right back. And it was just all staring at me. And it was like, my gosh, what is all this?
And yet, I think that this is a really important piece for listeners. So tell us how you were feeling. You obviously couldn't drink yourself to death. Had you thought about taking your own life, or was it more that you just didn't want to live anymore? Or was it even more numb than that, where you just didn't know what you wanted because you were feeling nothing? Like, talk to us about, where were you when you were in that dark place?
In that black pit, I could not feel anything at all. I was so numb and so hurt and so lost that it was just devoid of all feeling. And I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. I mean, it's just like I was just locked into a fog. And it's like the darkest, foggiest thing I've ever experienced. And then, I mean, sitting on that porch at 2 a.m., I would just sit there and just, the bills were piling up. I couldn't do anything about them. I just couldn't do anything. And I was sitting there on that porch trying to figure it out. I mean, I got no wife, no kids. Kids are going out of the house, no job, no church, no dog, no money. I might even lose the house because I'd have to sell it to pay the bills. It's like, what more can you take from me? Because you've taken every single thing you can from me.
And what's going on with your faith at this point? Has that also flown out the window along with everything else in your life?
Yeah, I had a discussion with somebody in the church in mid-February where they called me and said, well, how are you doing? I said, oh, really bad. I've got this. And they said, oh, we'll pray for you. By the way, it's time for you to renew your pledge. How much are you going to donate this year? And I just said, zero. I'm not donating anything right now. I don't have any money because I just told you I'm bankrupt. I've got bills. And they said, well, okay, well, we'll say a prayer for you. And that's when it just like, oh, well, thanks. That's a big help, you know? So I just sat there, just couldn't even think straight. I mean, I just couldn't think straight. But then I got thinking, what would Ann want me to do? You know? And what would Ann want me to be like? And then I thought of my mom. When I was a young kid, my dad died when I was 8 years old. My mom smoked and drank herself to death and died when I was 17. And I got made a ward of the state, and then I got emancipated and all that stuff. And she was born in the 20s, married my dad, you know, one of those things, and they marry in the 20s and in the 40s. And he went off to war. They had my older sister, then they had me later on. And she couldn't drive a car. She couldn't do a checkbook. She couldn't take care of herself because that was kind of the time she was brought up in. And when my dad died, it threw her into such a funk. She couldn't take care of herself, and she couldn't take care of us at all. So I had to get my little sister up, get her to go to school. My dad died. I had to write checks. I paid the bills. I did all these things. And
You were introduced to grief in a very, very young age.
right. Age 8, losing my dad, and 17, losing my mom.
Gosh, Frank.
And then I never was always angry at my mom for giving up on us because she gave up on us. She gave up on herself. She gave up on us. And I was very mad at it. And I realized that maybe her purpose in life was to show me how not to grieve. Maybe she was there as an example of how you can give up and you could just slowly kill yourself. And I did not want to do that. I had kids, and they were my kids. And I realized I wanted to be there for them. Right.
How old were you at this point? How old was Anne when she died?
She died at 52, and I was 55.
Okay, so yeah, you're right in the heart, in the middle of your life.
Yeah. She died right before her birthday and right after mine. So that's why we had a big split in years. So she died, and I thought of my mom. I thought of Anne. I mean, she didn't give up at all. I mean, and when she got a chemo treatment, her response to that was, let's go walk around the neighborhood and let's bring a trash bag and pick up trash because I want the chemo to go every cell it can. And so we do chemo walks, we call them, around the neighborhood. Not giving up. She didn't give up at all. And she did not want our lives to be badly affected by this. And then I realized that I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there in the fog. I mean, I had to do something. And I didn't know what. I couldn't figure out. I wasn't cognizant enough to know what. But I decided to pick up a trash bag and walk around the neighborhood at 2 a.m. And I picked up trash. And I did a chemo walk. And I was crying the whole time. First time I really cried. I mean, I just opened up and cried. And I cried and cried and cried.
I want to linger here for a moment because I feel like that was a pivotal moment when you chose life.
Right.
You had to intentionally choose to come back. It was either let grief swallow me whole and take my life, or
Do something.
do something.
But I couldn't figure out what. It's so many things going on. But I did just the one small thing, the picking up the trash and crying while I was picking up the trash. And like my daughter said, it's like you're not even bothered by this. You don't cry or anything about it. And I said, well, I'm very, very upset, but I just can't cry. And then after that event, I took her out to eat. And now we have a list of restaurants we both have cried at because I just like opened up and I couldn't stop crying. I mean, I cried and cried and cried. And for somebody my age and my generation as a guy, you just don't do that. Right. And suddenly I realized that was kind of stupid. It is okay to cry. And it was really important to do that.
Well, it started your healing journey, is what it did, right?
Right. I guess so. Yeah.
And I want to just pause because I think this is the grief work I always talk about, that grief work is the hardest work we'll ever do. And it is the most profound work we'll ever do, because in that grieving, that's when we can open up to life again and the gifts that come in that space our loved one has left behind. And we don't like to talk about gifts that grief brings us because nobody wants those gifts, because nobody wants that grief.
Uh-huh.
But if we're open to the work, it will happen. And so I can't wait for you to talk about this next half of your life. So you open the portal to your grief.
Right.
And now you are walking around and you're picking up trash. The first step you take toward rejoining the living. And I just thought about how picking up the trash just felt so metaphorical in grief work, where we have to start cleaning up the mess. Grief is so messy.
Right. Right.
So please continue.
The next night, I sat out on the porch and I drew a line down a piece of paper and I listed all that helped me and all that didn't help me, because there were so many things going on. I couldn't figure out what to work on first. And those that helped me were my family, my immediate family, my friends, my neighbors were really great. And I decided, well, how can I build on that? That's what I ought to focus on, is what helped me, what was positive, and then what did not help. I mean, my church didn't help. My religion didn't help. My job certainly didn't help. Volunteering didn't help. So why expend energy and time worrying about those and fretting about those? And what can I focus on that's positive? And then I signed up for a grief classes, and I went to several counselors. I had to go through 3 or 4 counselors before I found one that I stuck with.
Can you talk about that? Because I know through the people that I interviewed for my book and the numerous people I've talked to at the center where I did bereavement groups, etc., that people can go to that one counselor, they feel like they don't get it and they quit and they never go back. So can you talk to us about, how did you know it was the right one? Why was it the right one? Just talk to us a little bit about that process of not giving up and looking for a therapist that you felt comfortable with.
Well, I started off going to one of those church grief classes.
Like a grief group, you mean like a support group? Yeah.
Right, a grief share. And I found it to be they were talking down to me. They were talking about religion and they were warning me about all kinds of things. And they wanted me to join the church. And I just realized that was a game they were kind of playing and I didn't want to do that. I went to another therapist who had their theory about grief and they were really pushing that theory on me. They weren't really listening to me. It felt like they were telling me what I should do. And so every time I would listen to very carefully, I would do my list, what works, what doesn't work here. And if I didn't like it, I had no, one thing about grief is you don't put up with BS, right? Because you know how serious things are, how life can be taken. And I don't have time to do this stuff that doesn't help me. And so if I didn't get a real good feeling, there was 2 counselors I went one time and said no. There's one counselor I went 3 times and then said no. And then the 4th counselor listened to me, asked what I needed from her, and gave me some things to read, and then suggested I take an online grief course called Writing Your Grief. And I took that class, and then I met with her regularly, and I did the class, which was really hard. Hardest thing I've ever done. You get a prompt almost daily, you write back on that prompt. What would you say to the person who passed if you could? What legacy do you think that person left? What impact did that person have on your life? Write them a letter telling, and you had to do all these prompts, and they were just devastating. They were very hard. but I worked through them and I pushed through it, and it was very, very hard, but I got through them. And as I got through them, I started feeling a little bit better and a little bit better. The grief fog still was there, but I could kind of see a little more light forming.
And let's talk about it's just the irony, because I have a course also on grief and loss that's all about writing through your grief and loss,
Uh-huh.
because it's so powerful, right? It's just, and that's essentially
Right.
what I did in my book. I wrote my way through my grief and loss, and it was the most excruciating thing I've ever done. How
Right.
much time has passed at this point? Can you give us some markers from the time that your wife passed to where you are now when you've gone through this class? Have months passed? Has it been a year? How long?
Well, January 15th, she passed away. Mid-February is when I had kind of the work thing. And then about end of February, I realized I needed to do something.
Okay.
So I started all the grief counseling and grief classes in March, April, and in May, I got into the writing your grief portion. And that went through 6 weeks of writing. And I'm not a writer. I'm not one to express my feelings real clearly or openly, because that's just the way I was raised and, the expectations we had. And to sit there and write that was really painful. It's like trying to dance when you don't know how to dance or play a musical instrument. I didn't know how to do this stuff, but I did it and I got better at it and I got better expressing myself through that. And it took until the summer, like almost 6, 7 months before I started actually kind of becoming more functional. I got a job, a small job, just to give me some money there. The other thing I did is on the bills, I started calling, since I was unemployed, I called and wrote every one of those people and challenged each bill and asked for help and got payment plans, and I got them knocked way, way down. So that kept me from losing my house. I mean, but I would write these really sob story letters. But grief, when you lose somebody, it takes so much from you. I had no hesitation about telling them how much I've lost. So, yes, your surgery is a success. Yes, I'm glad you were there. And yes, you cost me $82,000 because it wasn't covered, but is a success. But she passed away a month later. So, can you help me with this bill? And a lot of times I got the bills written off or greatly reduced.
I'm
Like,
just so stunned. And I know listeners have to be, because when I heard your story, I didn't know how much time. I am astounded by your fortitude, I guess. I don't even know what to call it, that you were in this dark, completely debilitated place. You made up your mind, you had this awakening. I don't know what you want to call it, when you
right,
were on the porch. And from there, you just started doing really hard work to make this incredible progress. And I have to just say it out loud, because I'm just astounded by this. It is a short period of time when you actually look at what you accomplished from the time your wife died to you getting into counseling and doing this grief and loss work, and then tackling these bills. Because before you got to your bills, I was just about to say, what about this mounting debt
right,
that you had? It's
right.
amazing. It's just remarkable.
Well, you just, I don't know, you just make up your mind. When you, as a runner, one thing I liked is I didn't really like running a lot, but I liked the getting up in the morning, putting on my little stuff, running hard, being uncomfortable at first, and settling into the groove. And I kind of learned you have to be uncomfortable at first, but you get better as you go along. So I got very uncomfortable with a lot of things. And I told my church so long, you know, I told the people who didn't help so long. I realized I wasn't going to throw myself into a job anymore. I was going to just work for myself only. I got a dog. And, you lose a dog you're really close to. It's like, nothing's ever going to take that place. I'm never going to get another dog. If I do get another dog, I'm going to love it and something's going to happen to it and I'm going to be heartbroken again. And I decided, heck with it. It's better to have a dog and have somebody greet you when I come home and somebody who's happy to see me and take a chance, because if you do not feel anything and you refuse to re-engage, then you miss all the good stuff too. And then you live a life like my mom, just smoking and drinking and sitting at home, right? So I decided to get a dog, and I knew that was like really hard. And my big concern about getting a dog was someday this dog's going to die and I'll still be here and I'll be heartbroken. And it's like, no, I'm going to get a dog anyway. So I got a dog, and that dog helped a lot. I think the dog saved my life too, because I had to get up in the morning. I had to train him. I had to, as a puppy, and I had to walk with him. And he was another corgi, big dog with short legs, lots of personality.
And they say there's this wonderful saying that grief is love with no place to go. And with these dogs, they love so unconditionally, and it's a place for our love to go. And like you said, they give a renewed purpose because you've got to take care of them.
Right. And by taking care of somebody else, that forces you to take care of yourself some.
Yeah.
Right. And then after 6 months, I thought, I've got to show my kids. I started really talking to them a lot more, help them get to counselors, help them get the help they needed. And then I decided to date after 6 months because I felt I had to do that. And it was way, way too early. I was not ready to date yet. I was not done with the heavy grieving. And it was very unfair to the people I tried to date because I wasn't ready. I just decided to stop because it's like, no, this is not going well because I'm not ready yet. And the counselor was a big help there too. Don't rush these things, take their time. And I said, well, how long is this going to go? And she said, how long did you know Ann? 30 something years. It's going to take a long, long time. You're not going to just snap your fingers and get over it. So I waited a long time before I dated, almost a year and a half. And dating at my age, it's changed now. It's very different than it was in the 70s. It's very different. And I started realizing I'm just going to say, here's what I am. I'm 5'7". I'm 170 pounds. I'm not a big, tall guy. This is what I am. I like to do things outside. And people would say, well, I thought you'd be taller. I thought you'd, it's like, no, I said that, And I started doing meetup groups with people that were widowed. And the good thing about the widower meetup groups is there was not a pressure. It wasn't a date. It was just talking to people. And I would talk to other people that had these circumstances come up. Unfortunately, most of the widows were in their 70s and 80s. So I was very attractive to them because I was not interested in that. I joined like hiking groups, and I started doing what I could on a bicycle with my knee to get better shape. So I got myself physically and emotionally and mentally in better shape for almost a year. Just 6 months of super hard work coming out of the black hole, and then 6 months of kind of repair work and thinking carefully about what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, and how I wanted to experience this and live through it. And that was the hard part, was fully experiencing the grief, being willing to grieve, being willing to cry, being willing to feel lost, being willing to really miss the person.
Mm.
And then you have to also, I was, as a spouse in my age group, I was like in charge of taking care of my family. And I felt really guilty that I didn't take care of Ann, and she passed away. And I felt like I could have done something else. Yet when she was at her sickest, I was thinking, oh, when is this going to be over? So I was feeling super guilty about, like, I wanted it to be over. I didn't take care of her as I should have. She passed away. And you have to give yourself grace. You have to forgive yourself, even if the stuff you're blaming yourself for is ridiculous, right? But you have to give yourself grace and forgive yourself. You did the best you could do.
How did you do that, Frank? Guilt can be one of those really soul-crushing emotions that can really stay with people throughout their lifespan after they've lost somebody. Grief, as you know, I'm a therapist, and so that grief work is part of helping people release anger, right? There's a lot of anger after somebody dies, and guilt. If people carry guilt, not everybody does, but a large portion of people carry guilt over some part of that. Not everybody has a slow death, right? Cancer, it can be a traumatic death, a very quick death, etc. So, right. But here you had all of this time with your wife, and you still were harnessed with this guilt. How were you able to release it? Was it through the writing? Was it through the therapy? Was it a combination of those things? How did you actually come to a place of true forgiveness for those places where you think you fell short?
I started by forgiving my mother, okay? Because she did the best she could do at the time. And there was no counseling available. There was no help really. And she did the best she could at the time, and she just got lost. And I had to forgive her for that. And I thought, well, if I could forgive her of that, maybe I should start not being so guilty about some of these other things. The counselor really helped a lot. The writing helped a lot. There's one prompt about what would you do differently if you could. And the biggest thing I could do is we went to the State Fair of Texas, Ann's favorite event. We went every year, whole family went. And she was really tired because she was really sick. And there was this big Ferris wheel she always liked to ride. And she said, I'm just too tired. I said, well, let's go home. And the next day she says, I just really wish I could have ridden that Ferris wheel. And that's my big regret now, is God giving her one more ride on the Ferris wheel, right? So if that's your biggest regret, you're doing okay, you know. It is normal to be frustrated and upset with somebody when they're really sick. It's normal to wish it could just be done. And you have to just understand that everybody else, one thing I found out in the grief groups is everybody else feels that too. And you feel like you're the only one. I'm a real slug because I want it to be done. I want her to not suffer. Am I a horrible person? And you find out everybody else feels that way too.
And I think that that's one of the most powerful pieces of group work is understanding that, you know, we call it that. I always say that grief work is so ugly and so messy because those dark things come up inside of us, right? I mean, just we have to face it all. And it's not like you call it uncomfortable. It is terrifying sometimes to face those dark sides of us. I call it the dark side of us, right? Because that's what it feels like, our guilt, our, you know, that we're this horrible human. And then when you get to be in these groups, you get to hear that it is part of the human experience, all of these different feelings that we go through, and how natural it is, by the way, that when you're watching somebody you love suffer, of course you want it to end for them and for us, because
Right.
it's equally painful watching somebody we love die. And let's talk about the other ugly stuff we don't talk about. It's exhausting to be a caregiver. It's exhausting, that level of, I mean, all of it. It's mental, it's physical. It's like being in the depths of hell for so many different reasons.
Yeah, being a caregiver is soul sucking.
Yeah.
It really will suck your soul out. And I remember after she passed away, I went to go see one of the Lord of the Rings movies or one of those movies. And I got my ticket. I sat down, first movie I'd seen in years, and I went right to sleep. And I woke up at the end. I was like, oh, they all won. But I slept through the whole thing and they had to wake me up. But it is exhausting, and that exhaustion carries through. You're mentally exhausted, physically exhausted. Yeah, unable to cope. And then you have compound loss. You don't just lose that person.
Right.
You lose friends you had, the job you had, the status you had. All these things you don't expect happen. You lose all these things.
All the things that we think define us until everything is stripped away and
Right.
we're left with the essence of who we are, which is not all of those things.
Right. We really depend on this candy shell we build around ourselves, the M&Ms, right? And then inside there's this core, and grief will melt away that candy shell and the true you comes out, whether you like it or not. And you have to be okay with that, and you have to work through that. You know, I got fortunate finding a good counselor. I got fortunate doing all these exercises. I had some really good friends who stuck with me, and the dog, Harvey, we worked through it.
So we're almost at the top of the hour, and now we're going to get like our icing on this cake. Tell us about the second half, your new lease on life, and where you are now.
I started dating about 15 months later, and then I found somebody that I really liked, Jenny, and she's a oncology nurse of all things. Met her at a group, and she was really honest and kind of open and not outdoorsy, and kind of was straight up opposite of my wife. Didn't look anything like her. It didn't act anything like her. But I really hit it off with her, and we started going way out a lot. Then we became exclusive, and then we got married last year. So,
yeah. Congratulations.
Invited all the family and friends in the middle of COVID. We had a little party. We got a band out. We had a great time. She was okay with photos of Ann in the house. And I met her 15, 16 months after Ann passed away. And she helped me grieve. She helped me process some of that. And
Well,
she
an
also,
oncology nurse, when you said you met her at group, did you meet her at a grief group?
yeah. Uh-huh.
So was she a facilitator or had she also lost
She had
someone?
lost several patients actually. So she
Right.
was there because of the patients she had lost. Yeah. She was divorced, but that was a long time ago. So she helped me with the grief process. She let me keep pictures of Anne in the house, helped me clean the house out. We rented a sailboat for a 2-week trip as a relationship test, and we didn't kill each other. We had a great time on the sailboat. And I realized I had to work very hard to be more honest and open in my relationship, say how I feel. I have to be that way with my kids. I have to be that way with people that are important in my life and not be closed and not be so careful. Work, I became very selective on the industry I wanted to go into and the job I would do and the boss I would become. So I got a job at an airline. I always liked airline stuff. And I ended up working there, ended up raising up to be a VP of an airline. And I cared about the people who worked for me. If somebody needed to be off because they were pregnant, we would work it out so they could work at home and work when they felt like it and be off when they needed to be off. And when someone had a spouse or a relative die, it was like, take care of yourself and your family. And I became a better boss. And in doing so, I got very successful. If you treat people well, they'll do a lot for you, I found out. I'm more understanding, more flexible with the bosses. And I decided to retire early at 62 because when you lose somebody, you finitely know life is short and will end. And you are staring at that abyss all the time and you don't know when it's going to end or how. And I realized I have to live my life fully. And I could keep working to make money for somebody, or I could retire and sit out and look at the lake. I mean, so here's my view.
Oh my
Right?
gosh, it's so beautiful. Where are you physically located?
It's Cedar Creek Lake. It's a small lake in East Texas. And we got a sailboat out the back door. We got a little pontoon boat. Jenny and I got married. We bought this smaller house, sold the house in the city. And I just realized that time is short. You're not promised tomorrow, and you're going to have to live for the moment. And I really have two lives. I've got my life with Anne, which was my family life. And I've got my life with Jenny, which is kind of the next phase of my life. And right now I'm focusing on fitness and travel once COVID clears. We're going to start traveling some more and having fun, enjoying life. And I volunteer here. I volunteer for GED classes. I volunteer for some other things I do in the area and Meals on Wheels. But I'm one of those really rare, very fortunate people who have had two amazing women love me and they help me become a better person. And you don't get much luckier than that, right?
You're going to make me cry. I always end up crying at some point. Your story just touches me on so many levels. And I feel like you're sort of this beacon of hope for people who really are in that darkness. And I wanted to ask you, I always ask, what does self-love look like at the end of my podcast? But I want to ask a different question because I love the metaphor of the M&M in the outer shell. And so I want to ask you, what is the most surprising thing that you discovered about yourself when your outer shell melted in your grieving process?
I'm actually a pretty kind, loving person underneath there. I just got to let other people know about it, you know. You don't just keep it all constricted up to yourself. Yeah.
That's wonderful because I'm doing the math. So it's been 7 years now, right? Since he
Right.
died.
Yeah. Well, 2015, right.
So for listeners, Frank said, I'm not on any social media, but he does have an email and he is open to hearing from people if you are interested in contacting him like I was. So his email is f.vaughan, and that you spell his last name VAUGHAN at verizon.net. And we will also have that in the show notes. Frank, is there anything else you want to say to our listeners, either those who might be grieving or those who are trying to support people in grief, that you have not mentioned in the last hour together?
To support people in grief, the important thing to do is not say, let me know if I can help anyway. because no one in grief, in serious grief, no one knows what they need, right? To support somebody deeply grieving, call them up and say, let's go get a cup of coffee. Let's sit on the porch and let them just vent their pain, because it's pure raw pain that scares away other people. Let people vent, let them talk, and just do things for them. Don't ask what you can do, because when you're grieving, I did not know what I needed at all.
Yeah.
But somebody brought over some food. It's like, oh, I guess I haven't eaten for a couple of days. You know, so
Yeah, I do. And I say the same thing. And, that when my brother died, it was the darkest period of my life. And we forget to do the tiniest things to take care of ourselves. And food is always helpful. And the other, like you just said, is hold space for the person who's grieving.
right. And be careful about saying those little platitudes, right? About, they're in a better place or things like that.
Yeah,
And then
they're the worst.
the hardest thing, the most courageous thing I did was just taking one small step forward. And once I did that, everything opened up. But you have to take that one small step forward. It's like the oxygen mask in the airplane. You have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of others. And I was lucky enough to be able to take care of myself, and now I'm able to take care of others, and just one of those things.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story here with all of us. I know the way it touched me, and I know it's going to touch hundreds of people that are listening. And
Great.
so, Frank, thank you. And I'm sure you're going to be hearing from people in your email.
Thank you for what you do too. This is really hard work to do, but it's really vital. And I really appreciate you talking about grieving. And in this society, we don't talk about grief like we should, I think. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. I agree. And listeners, thank you again for tuning in. And we'll see you next week.